Okay, can I have everybody's attention, please? Hi, students, just give us a moment. We want to just sort out the echo. Yeah, that's weird.
No.
All right. All right, Zoom students, I hope you can hear me. And the students that are in front of me, may I have your attention, please? Greetings to everybody in attendance. So I am Dr. Shakira Sheikh, an academic in the School of Life Sciences at Westville. And let me take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to each of you at this first meeting of 2024 in our workshop series for postgraduates hosted by the School of Life Sciences. We are delighted to have you with us and hope that you will find today's topic both useful and interesting. We are hosting today's workshop in a hybrid format, as you know. So obviously those that are with us here in the venue, and then we have a streaming system to the Pietermaritzburg campus via Zoom, where my co-host, Dr. Caswal Muniai, is present. Importantly, we are meeting today in a workshop format in which we will begin with a presentation, followed by a question and answer session. But I'm sure our speaker is not going to mind if you have questions along the way. Please also feel free to share your comments after the talk, even those students on Zoom. So we encourage you to make the most of your time with us. In addition, there will be a short questionnaire to complete towards the end. We would really appreciate your feedback on that questionnaire to analyze the impact our efforts are having on this initiative to help postgraduates. At this point, please may I ask that you turn off your cell phones so that you do not distract the speaker. And without any further ado, it is my privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker for today's workshop. That's Professor Neil Koorbanally. Professor Koorbanally, as you may know, has been a key figure in the College Research Office as the Dean of Research. However, we were delighted to hear a few days ago that he was seconded to the role of Dean of Research for the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I think let's give him a hand for that. And this is a most remarkable achievement in a very short career span. Prof. Koorbanally is an organic chemist by training and holds a PhD from the former University of Natal and a master's cum laude in organic chemistry. He was a former Colenso Scholar at St. John's College in Cambridge in the United Kingdom. He has supervised 25 doctoral and 26 master's students, published over 170 papers, and holds a patent on bioactive compounds against sickle cell anemia. He has been a member of the editorial board of Natural Products Communications for several years. His accolades include a C2 NRF rating and a Google Scholar H index of 32. Currently, he supervises several doctoral and master's students working on the synthesis of bioactive medicinal compounds. We are absolutely honored to have Prof with us today, and we eagerly anticipate his valuable insights into the NRF grant writing process. Students, please put your hands together and give a very warm welcome to Prof.
Thank you, Shakira. It was a very interesting and a warm welcome. And thank you, students, for being here today. It's very nice to see a lecture full, and I'm sure I've also got a lot of participants. I see 30 participants online as well. So welcome to you. We won't forget you. So I think Shakira is monitoring hands. If there's any burning questions, we can also take questions from the online audience as well. So let me make a start. So most of you are here today because you want to start applying for your postgraduate funding. And it's a nice time to do this when the call still comes out. I know a lot of students leave it for the last minute, and leaving it for the last minute, the last week, or some people even leave it for the last 2 or 3 days and then decide to do something. That's just a recipe for disaster. Because then you'll be surprised at how many times when we review applications for NRF doctoral and master's bursaries, we can actually see that this is a rush job. You can see when someone put it together in the last minute. And that's because there's a whole lot that goes into preparing your application for a bursary. And in some cases, it's almost as important as writing a dissertation or writing a master's thesis, the thought that goes into telling someone to give you money to do something, which is even, I think, a greater task than giving someone to mark something for you. Now you're going to have to convince someone that they're making good use of taxpayers' money to give you a bursary to do your postgraduate studies. So thank you for being here again. It's very nice to see you. So I'm going to talk about the postgraduate funding NRF proposals. But today's lecture or seminar or workshop can also help you when you're preparing for other proposals. There's nothing stopping you from going onto the web, looking for other opportunities for funding your studies. And a lot of times, I'm not going to say students, I'm going to say South Africans in general, South African researchers sometimes don't see a world outside of the NRF. But I want to challenge you as well that this is not the only funding agency that can fund your studies. And you need to go out, and the resources that we have are all on the World Wide Web these days. So you can go there and search for your topic and see what bursaries are out there for students, and you can actually apply for them. Right, so just an outline of what we're going to have today. I'm going to have a brief introduction and purpose of why we're here, and then tell you a little bit about the scorecard that we use. If it helps you, if you know how people score you, then you can actually aim your proposal at getting good scores and getting good reviews so that you can actually get the funding in the long run. I'm going to also tell you a bit about what to write and how to write it. A lot of time, you don't know what to actually write in the section. I don't know what information do they want here. So I'm going to give you a bit of information as to what to write, and then how to write it is very important as well. Sometimes you might think that, okay, I can just put all the facts down. I can just, put information down in no particular order. I just want to put my thoughts onto a paper. And that's not really how you should actually go about writing a proposal. So how to write what you're going to write is also very, very important. And hopefully, as we go on, you're going to see that as well. And then 2 other important points that you won't get a chance to do if you leave this right till the end. And that is checking and getting an opinion. And that's very, very important. And I notice sometimes, we live in this world where things are very instantaneous. I'm sure you'll send your friends a WhatsApp in a matter of seconds, and some of you use predictive text on your telephone, on your phones, and sometimes it changes why into who or what into was, and the meaning is actually changed. And you don't actually check that. If you don't read what you actually wrote, you can send someone to something to read where it actually doesn't make sense or it's not coherent. So it's very, very important to check. And the checking is actually reading your own stuff to see whether everything is right. Sometimes, because we're working with the online system, you'll be typing and typing and typing, and at the end, when you reach your allocated words, it truncates everything after that, and you leave your thoughts hanging in midair. And the reviewer now looks at this and wonders, why didn't the applicant actually check what they submitted? And again, it boils down to not having enough time to do that at the end, because you want to submit your proposal by midnight. So you click on the button submit without actually looking at a print version and making sure that everything is fine. Right? So that checking is very, very important. I'll talk a little bit about that, and then about an opinion. it's sometimes very, very good to get an opinion of some other person as to what you wrote. It's not just good to give it to the reviewers and give it to the funding agencies and say, tell me what you think. It's nice to get an opinion before you actually give it to the people that are praising you. And there are many people that you can actually use. A lot of us are busy these days, so don't think it's only your professors or only your lecturers that can give you an opinion. Your fellow classmates, the people in your laboratories, some senior people in the laboratory that have applied for funding and that have gotten funding might also be an avenue that you can use to tap into giving you an opinion on what you wrote, right? So don't feel shy or don't feel, like you are imposing on someone to ask them, can you just take an hour out of your day, read what I wrote, and just give me some feedback to make my proposal better. And then a very important part at the end, your supervisor approval. And this is very, very important because your supervisors normally know, or your potential supervisors that you identify, normally know a lot about the subject matter. And they can actually say, okay, I see what you're going to do here and approve what you do, or I don't think this is going to work. I'm not going to approve it. I'm going to ask you to do these other 2 or 3 things or 5 things to make your proposals better. So getting a supervisor's approval is also very, very good. Sometimes they get surprised as well, because when they ask to approve something on the system for you, it's the first time they actually seeing your proposal. They have to go and read it, and they say, okay, I wonder why the student actually wrote that. But if that communication takes place beforehand, it's much easier for them to go and approve something that you are going to apply for. So I'll talk about a bit about that as well. So the first thing I actually want to show you is the review scorecard. And it's very, very important to know how you're going to get scored in terms of your proposal. So if you're a master's student, we score you on 4 particular subjects. And the first 2 of them, you don't really have much of a say in. So the first one is your academic merit. When I say you don't have much of a say in, I mean at this point, you don't have much of a say in it. So those of you who are still engaged in your studies, if you're still doing your exams and you're still writing up your masters, do the best job you can do, because you want as high a mark as possible to give you the edge in getting a high score here. And you can see that those who get 75% and above automatically get a 3 here. Those who get between 70 and 74 get a 2, and it goes down the line. If you don't get 65, you're not even eligible to apply. Right? So very, very importantly, you need to do well in your previous degree. When someone gives you something, they want to see that there is a chance for success, and they look at a track record. And what better track record to look at? And I think in the academic environment, the first thing that we look at is look at students' marks. The first thing I do is go onto SMS, let me look at the student profile, let me see who I'm dealing with. Is a student a straight A student? Is a student a B student? Is a student an average C student? Or is the student struggling? Right? So that's the first thing they look at. So do very, very well in your studies, because that allows you to get a good mark. And you can see this carries 35%. So over a third of the percentage goes to your previous degree. So if you're in your master's year applying for a PhD, you would not have your master's marks already if you're still engaging in your master's degree. In that case, they use the honors mark. Right? If you're in your honors and you're applying for a master's degree and you haven't completed your honors yet, then they will use your undergraduate 3rd-year averages. Right? So they will go the year back until such time that they do have a mark that they can look at and gauge whether or not you're in the top rung of the students to get that award. And you can see that if you've got a limited pot of money, which money is always very hard to come by these days, they look at giving bursaries to the best students, right? It's not the only criterion, but you can see it's a chunk of the criterion. Or over a third of the marks go towards students who do very, very well. Right, and just a reminder that if you get under 65, you cannot apply for this particular grant because you're not eligible. So if you had 65 in your master's and you want to apply for a PhD now, you cannot apply for this particular grant. But it doesn't stop you now from using what you learned here to go and look for other grants where you are eligible, right? It might be a grant in your specific field that doesn't really have a cutoff point for marks, and you can apply for that particular grant, right? So very, very important. The completion time for your degree is also important, not as important as the marks. You can see it carries 15% of the total score, but it's still a contender as well. And that 15% means that if you complete it in minimum time or the prescribed time for your degree, so a master's we allow for a master's degree 2 years. So if you can complete your master's within 2 years, it holds you in good stead. If you take an extra 6 months, it impacts you. You can see you go then from a 3 to a 2. And then if you go an extra year or more, it impacts you further, and then you just get a 1. And if you go over that, you get a 0. So if you're taking 4 years to get a master's degree, I mean, in 4 years' time, you could have completed a master's and a PhD. And if you're taking 4 years just to get a master's degree, it's going to impact you. That track record is not going to look too good now. Even though you might have scored very well, you got 80% in a master's that took 4 years to do, it won't hold you in good stead here, right? So the time taken to complete your degree is also a factor. So these two things, you don't really have much control over at the time of applying. They are what they are, right? And you're going to have to come to terms with them. They are what they are, and put them in your application. I'm going to talk a little bit about this here, right? And this is the priority research area. Now, we're very, very lucky in the sciences that most of our priority research areas, or our research areas that we intend to do research on, are priorities. In science, we want to answer topical questions. We want to solve the problems of the day. So a lot of you might be doing projects in climate change, in drought resistance, in agriculture, in energy, in pharmaceuticals, right? So the list is endless, and all of those are problems that we are trying to solve. And just keep in mind as well that you also have to be a little bit well-read when you are applying for a grant. People just want to know a very narrow, specific thing. People want to know what's happening in the global arena, and especially in your introductions, when you're trying to make an impact. And I'll talk a little bit about making an impact as well. When you're trying to make an impact, people want global statistics. People want national statistics. You need to know what's happening in the country. We need to know what's happening in the world, especially with regard to things like energy and water and the green economy. So there's a lot of reading that you might, if you haven't been reading up all along in a specific area, you're going to have to start now, right? Getting some papers, getting some literature on the topic that you're trying to research, on the problems that you're trying to solve, because that's going to make someone give you money, right? If you want to work on a topic that makes energy freely available for everyone in South Africa, who's not going to give you money for that, right? The end of load shedding. People are not going to, they will give you money in a heartbeat. If you want to make, do a project that can deliver water to every household in South Africa, nobody in their right mind is going to say, okay, no, I'm going to hold this funding from the student. They're going to give it. But you're going to have to articulate what the problem is as well. If you're going to say, okay, I want to give every student in South Africa a notebook and a pen, and I'm going to do research on that, no one's going to give you money for that when everyone's using laptops and doing electronic these days, right? So take note of the problem that you're trying to solve. Is it relevant? And ask yourself that, is it relevant? And the literature and the news and the topical things will tell you whether or not what you're studying is relevant. But mostly we don't really have a problem with research priority areas in the sciences, agriculture, or engineering. So I'm very, very lucky being in this college. You're very, very lucky sitting in this college as well. You don't want to study a poem, you don't want to study English literature that might not be too, it's very, very important for particular fields, but I mean, it's not going to solve a problem that we have in today's world. Don't quote me and don't share this with people in humanities. Right, and the last thing we're going to look at is how to write the project outline. So for a master's student, you don't have a full proposal, but we do ask you for a project outline. And in many cases, when we look at applications that are submitted in the master's area, people don't understand really what the project outline means. In some cases, we just get a list of topics and people think this is the outline here, there's my 5 points, and that's it. And can you see it carries 30%? So almost as important as your academic merit is what you write about what you're going to do. So if you think a project outline is just a list of topics I'm going to study, we won't give you 30% of your total mark for that particular thing, right? So you're going to have to really write something here, and I'll give you some guidelines as to what to write and how to write it. And you see, when we score the students on this, we score them on either comprehensive or adequately described or partially described. And as I go through the talk, I'll tell you what each of these actually mean. Now, if you look at the score sheet here, they all add up to 100, and it would be good for you to score as much as possible. This gives you a weighted score, and that then goes to the NRF, where you don't only compete locally amongst the university, you also compete with everybody else in South Africa that wants a bursary as well, right? So you want to do as much as you can in this particular application to make it the best application that you can actually have. When it comes to the PhD, those of you applying for a PhD bursary sitting here for masters, the same thing about academic merit. I'm not going to go through that again, but you need to have a good academic merit score. The completion time is also very, very important. And here we use about 3 years for a PhD. Right, so 3 years for a PhD, and then every 6 months or a year that you take over that takes time off your score in this particular category. There's something else that we look at for PhD students, and that's a track record of research outputs. And this is very, very important because students sometimes shy away of doing things. I'm in my master's year, but I'm too scared to go stand up in front of an audience and give a talk in a conference. I don't want to go to the Postgraduate Research Innovation Symposium because I don't like talking, right? And part of being a scientist and part of getting training in a research area is being enthusiastic about what you're going to do. If I stand in front of you here and I'm not enthusiastic about training you on how to write this, it's going to be a very boring talk and you're not going to get much out of it. But if you're researching something that you're passionate about, you are going to want to tell anyone and everyone what you're studying, what results you're getting, how you're proceeding in the lab. It's also going to, it has a chain effect because then you want to get into the lab, do experiments, test what you want to do out, talk about your stuff. So don't shy away about doing anything. And when we look at outputs in this particular area, we also, beside the conventional publications that people put out. Now, as a master's student, there are many students that do publish, but there's also some students that don't publish because at the time of applying, you might not have had results to publish, but you might have had opportunities to present your results. So we also look at things as presentations, either local presentations, and I'm not talking just presentations in your own group where you got 4 or 5 people. I'm talking about seminars within your school, seminars within the university, and seminars in conferences that you can attend at the Postgraduate Research and Innovation Symposium that we hold in our college. Right, so that happens around October or so, I think October, November, we hold that conference. And if you have results that you can present there, then I encourage you to put that because a lot of people score at least 1 or 2 marks here in this particular category because they presented, right, at one thing or the other. Right, so if you do have opportunities, I want to see you applying for that. Don't shy away and say, no, I'm not going to apply, let other people do it. So I want you to be the one who's telling people about your research, what results you're getting, even if they negative results, right? You can tell them what you tried and why it's negative and what you're going to do now in order to take it to the next level, right? So very, very important we have that particular thing about track record. Again, we have this on priority research area focus, and I'm not going to talk about this again. I told you about that in the master's. And then originality is another important facet that we look at doctoral degrees and not master's degrees. So in a master's degree, you can repeat an experiment. You can actually look at something that's been done before, and you can change it slightly. I'm not going to say do exactly the same thing, but you can change it slightly and get a master's degree out of it. Because for a master's degree, we have to train you in the realm of doing research. So we want to say, okay, let's see if a person can actually go through all the points that they need to go through in terms of a research project, regardless of whether they are contributing new knowledge to the field. But in a PhD, we don't just want you to learn research techniques. We want you to contribute new knowledge. So you must be the first person to have studied that plant. You must have been the first person to make these 10 molecules. You must be the first person to try a specific catalyst. So I'm using a lot of chemistry examples because I'm a chemist, right? You must be the first person to study recalcitrance in a particular plant species, right? Well, way back in my honors degree, I also did some recalcitrancy, so I know that those things as well. But bring that originality and novelty into your project here. And there's a part where you have to actually talk about originality in your problem statement, your knowledge gaps, and everything else. So put those things in that section where you're talking about originality. And research is such that we don't want to get up one morning and think about a whole brand new idea. Right? I'm not going to get up one day in the morning and say, okay, let me try and use a pot to store water in. People have been storing, water in pots for a long time now. So you're going to have to get up one day and see how you're going to use a new design of a pot in order to make storage of water more efficient. That's the type of thing. You're not going to invent a wheel. I'm not going to say, okay, people have been using round wheels for a long time. Let me try and use square wheels. Right? It's not, that's not a good way to go. Trying to think something out of the box, something totally new. Right? So you're going to make slight modifications. You're going to make slight changes to existing knowledge. And that's why it's so important. And a lot of the time it surprises me that a lot of people have applications where they don't have literature references in them, because you're always building on something that's already being done. As I say, you're not going to have a totally new idea. Sometimes you may, right? But those are very rare cases where someone has a totally new idea to use maybe leaves for energy. That type of thing. That's a totally new idea, using leaves for energy. You're going to have to convince someone to give you money to do that. And why is someone going to give you R1 million to use leaves for energy when they don't see anything going in there? But if someone uses coal for energy and you now want to use sand for energy, and you've got some mechanism by which you can use it. And, one is using carbon, the other one is using silicon. Carbon and silicon are very close on the periodic table. You can make a case for that particular thing and convince someone. I'm convincing you of something that has no chance whatsoever, right? But I can see you nodding now, and you're seeing that probably I can, because carbon and silicon sit close on the table, periodic table. Carbon is used for energy. If I burn silicon, maybe got you thinking. And that's what you need to do. The funders don't really know what you know about your subject. And in all cases, I'm not going to say most cases, in all cases, you should be knowing more than anybody else about what you want to do. Not your supervisors, not your deans, not your heads of schools, not the people giving you money. You should be knowing more than anyone else about what you want to do, right? So you should be the best at convincing someone to give you money to do that particular research, right? So the originality, and this other important thing I want to talk about is identifying the knowledge gaps that many students don't actually do. And especially for those of you applying for PhDs. You would have gone through the literature and saw what people have been doing in a particular topic. You might have got some ideas, but as you get ideas and you start reading around the subject, you'll see that many people had your ideas and they've tried things and they've failed, but they've tried things and been successful. And that idea of you doing the same thing now is squashed because people have already done it. As I say, if you're a master's student and you still want to do it, it's fine. If you're a PhD student, you're going to try to identify gaps in the literature where someone has not done a particular thing. They might have looked at this and looked at that and looked at that, but not looked at this particular aspect. And you are now going to look at a particular aspect. And in that particular aspect and what you're trying to do, you're going to try and fill a gap in the literature. So you always want to add to the body of knowledge, right? People are going to see Koorbanally is the one who made these two hybrid molecules. No one has actually put a quinoline together with a benzimidazole and put a hydroxy group on that. Koorbanally says, okay, let me try that. Because I went to the literature and no one has done that before. People have made quinolines, people have made benzimidazoles, people have got ideas, and this is my own research. But no one has put the two together and said, combine them and let's see what effect they have. That's a knowledge gap. right? People don't know what's going to happen if you put the two together. So you're going to make experiments as a scientist, make experiments now to do that. Put them together, test them, and add to the literature. So people says, okay, quinolines have this effect, benzamides also have this effect, and the hybrid molecule with the 2-in-1 have this effect. And you would have actually wrote up about that. So that's going to be your contribution to science, right? So be very, very specific about what your contribution to science is in this particular field as well. The last section for PhDs is about potential impact of the research. And you can see 10% has been allocated for potential impact. And this is the impact that you're going to make in that national goal or the strategic goal. And don't feel shy of overselling yourself here. If you're going to make and even if it's potential, if I'm going to make a potential drug for antibacterial resistance, I'm going to try and sell this as much as possible to make it sound as exciting as possible and lucrative as possible for someone to give me money to do what I want to do. So I'm going to say that I'm going to start by saying antibacterial resistance is a real problem. See, all the people died. I'm going to quote incidences from the literature where people have died in countries where people have actually gone to hospitals and picked up an infection and not been able to get better and lost their lives. And we had no drugs that would actually cure them. And I'm going to say that my particular drug has the ability to overcome that antibacterial resistance and save lives, which has a huge impact in the pharmaceutical area, not only locally, but worldwide, to solve the problem of antibacterial resistance. You see the impact that has, right? So don't feel shy of making an impact. If you want to study something about water, and you're going to say that cholera is a huge epidemic in certain parts of the country, quote statistics in that particular country where people have died of cholera, where maybe entire villages have actually fell apart because people haven't been able to purify water. And if you're going to make a tablet that can purify drinking water for people in that area, you're going to change the lives of people, say, in drought, in cholera-ridden countries or cholera-ridden villages. That's going to be a huge impact, right? Imagine the lives you're going to save, right? So always think, what is the potential impact of what I am trying to do? And in many cases, you don't see that because you're too busy. I'm going to go to the lab. I'm going to do this procedure. I'm going to get this GC, I'm going to run this particular instrument. You get to be too scientific. You don't actually get to go out there and talk real science to people in lay terms. And that's things you actually need to do and sell. As I said, they're not going to be scientists reading this, and they're not going to know all the chemistry jargon, biology jargon, geology jargon, etc. But they are going to know what problems there are in society and what needs to be solved. And that's where the impact comes in. So don't feel shy of making that particular impact. Before I move to each of these, maybe it's a nice time to pause online if there are any questions, and maybe in the audience if there are any questions before I move to the scorecard. Any questions from you? Okay, I thought before I move on, it would be good for me to show you what a scorecard is like. So this is the normal scorecard that we get to appraise, and each of these lines are a particular student. And you can see here that we give you a mark for academic merit. As I say, sometimes this first column and the second column comes pre-populated for us because there's a set way in which we give you marks for your academic merit and your completion time. The priority research areas, you can see that this is a science one. Almost everybody is working in areas of priority research focus. Right? I'm sure that almost all of you sitting here are also working on priority research area focuses as well. And the last one, you can see that where we didn't need to where I don't have any marks in here, is what we need to go through, and that's your project outline. Right? So that's what you need to write about, and I'll talk about that in a second or so. And this is just a PhD one. You can see in a PhD one, it's slightly different because we're not going to score you on one thing anymore. We're also going to look at your track record, as I said. We're going to look at your originality, and people will start looking and scrutinizing PhDs on originality. And then also we're going to give you marks on potential impact of your research, etc. So we are going to score you on these types of things. There's 3 things that we actually need to go into your application, read what you wrote, and give you a mark on that, right? And that's why I say put your best foot forward, because in that particular area, it's how you sell yourself and how you sell your application that makes a big difference, right? So in those areas, you need to make a big difference. Right, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go through each of the master's and PhD applications. In the master's one, I'll talk basically about the abstract and the project outline. And in the PhD, I'll talk about these 4, what you need to do, and mainly talk a little bit about originality. I think I've done that already, but I might just stress a few more points in that. All right, so let's look at the abstract here. And the first thing I have is that you need to be clear and concise, right? We don't want beating around the bush and long sorts of headings, long things that I want to do, finding cures for molecules with 3 different parts in it, and 2 added on appendages. We don't want something big. We just want something that's very clear and very, very concise. And for example, if you want to, and I'm going to use an example from my research, new pharmaceuticals for antibacterial resistance. You see, it's clear. I'm going to make new new pharmaceuticals for antibacterial resistance. It's clear and very, very concise. People don't need to think about what you're going to do. They know Neil is going to do research on antibacterials, and that is probably going to fix up the problem of antibacterial resistance, right? Be clear and concise. Always state what the aim of the project is, right? So what you may be doing, right, has no bearing on what the ultimate product is going to be right at the end, right? So you're going to be making molecules. As a chemist, you might be making molecules. As a biologist, you might be doing plant propagation. You might be looking at germination. You might be doing cell biology of different types of things. But that's not what the ultimate aim is. The ultimate aim is things like, I want to cure cancer, right? That's your ultimate aim. I want to find new drugs. You don't just want to find new drugs. You want to find new drugs for what? To cure maybe antibacterial resistance. You want to find drugs for diabetes. That's the aim of your particular project, right? So always have that aim in mind and think about what you're trying to do, right? Once you have that aim in mind, I know I want to cure cancer. I know I want to find a drug for diabetes, right? I know I want to find a method to store seeds for 12 months, right? I know I want to do all that. Then you're going to say, how do you aim to do it? Because now I know what I want to do. There's my ultimate aim. And you can see we're working backward. We're not saying, okay, I was in my honors and then in my honors project, I did this. So I'm still going to do these 3 experiments in my honors. We're working backward. Now we're thinking at the end game first, and we're working back from there, right? And very, very important when you want to do it, whether you're a master's student or a PhD student, I always find it nice to identify a gap in the literature, right? Where people haven't been doing something, right? So they've been doing, and you only know what gaps there are in the literature when you review the literature. So part of your application is going to be a review of the literature to say that Pillay has done this, Mshlongo has done that, Naidu has done that, Ma has done that. Everyone has done their particular parts. And at the end of it, it would be nice to say what you're going to do. Because you've got what everybody else has done, and you quoted where the papers are. And that's why you're scientists, because you scientifically write that to say that in 1982, they've done that. 2010, they've done that. 2025, I'm going to do this, right? So it'll be very nice to identify that gap in the literature. And you'll be surprised how many people don't do this when they are putting applications forward. To say that I'm actually looking at this specific aspect of my project, right? So for example, things like synthesizing a drug related to compounds found in a natural remedy known to have anti-cancer properties. No one has actually done that, right? So people might have taken compounds, and they might have done things, but no one has actually taken something that's been used and tried to synthesize something to make freely available for everyone, right? So the synthesizing a drug related to compounds, right, found in a natural remedy. And I'm saying related because we're not just going to take the same one. If we know that this particular drug cures cancer, but there might be side effects, right? So when you're reviewing the literature, also say, okay, science will not progress. People will stop being scientists if everything worked perfectly and we were in a perfect world and there were no problems. But you know that, and I was in a talk in Stellenbosch last week, and one of the things I said was we very, very surprised at how sometimes when we start to do research and we start to get answers and publish, we end up with new problems in how we solve things. And this was coming out of ways in which they were looking at ways of getting green economies going. And they said, okay, let's now try and look at a way of absorbing different molecules. And once you absorb, and I think they were looking at absorbing sulfur from petrol, right? And you have petrol, and one of the problems is that the sulfur in the petrol goes into your engines and they destroy your engines. So now the engineers are looking at ways of taking that sulfur out of the petrol, which will solve the problem of the engines. So you're going to be happy driving a car because now my engine is going to last me longer. I need to service it maybe every 3 years, not every 1 year. You made an advancement to science, but the adsorbent that you use to take the sulfur out, where are you throwing it? And what other problem are you causing? So sometimes by finding solutions, we're creating new problems that we need to find solutions for as well. So how to take that adsorbent with the sulfur and use that sulfur in the particular thing, right? So you see how science actually thinks. As a scientist, your mind is going to work slightly differently, and you're going to put those things in there, all to make an impact, right? All to make an impact. All right, so once you're going to do that, you're going to say, okay, once I make that drug, what am I going to do then? I'm going to test it. I'm going to compare the activity to known drugs because I want to convince someone that what I'm doing is very, very topical. So I just make a drug and I say, okay, it cures cancer, but they say, what? We've got these 10 drugs here. Where does yours actually lie in the continuum? Why should we be taking this one and not the other 10 drugs? Right? So you want to do a comparison of that. So you're going to test it for activity, compare it, and then maybe evaluate its toxicity because you want to say now, okay, this drug that I have might not cure you in 3 days, right? It's going to take 2 weeks for you to feel better, but you won't get very, very sick because the drug is non-toxic, right? So whereas a doctor says you can take just 3 tablets in 5 days, and that's the cost, maybe it's some drug that you can take every day to prevent something from happening, right? So that might also be good to evaluate its cytotoxicity, right? So what you aim to do, so what the aim of your project is and how you aim to do it is very, very important. And you're going to put this in your project outline. So you can see it's not just a point form of what you're going to do, not just a point form of topics. It's actually a full proposal, reviewing the literature, identifying the gaps, saying what your aims are, and saying how you're going to do it and what you're going to do. All that needs to go in your project proposal. Right, and it's very, very nice to put this part in as well. A lot of people forget about this. What result do you aim to achieve? Right? A lot of people forget about this because they're not quite sure what they're going to get. You're going to make something, you don't know whether or not it's going to be a drug. You're not quite sure whether it's going to cure something, right? So you're always nice to, in your proposals, to be positive, right? Otherwise, if you're not positive, then people are going to see that Neil is not positive. Let me not give him money. Let me give the money to somebody else who knows that he's going to make a drug to cure cancer, right? So you're going to always say that the molecule I am going to make, and you're going to do this very scientifically, you're going to say, I'm taking A, which cures cancer but has that effect. I'm taking B, which doesn't quite cure cancer but is not so toxic. I'm putting the two together to make an anti-cancer compound that will have the effect and not be toxic. you're going to say that I'm going to do that. And at the end, when you're predicting, you're going to say that I am going to, you're not going to say, and people sometimes, they use things that they want to be too correct and too scientific, and they use terms like, I am potentially going to make this, I am potentially going to do that, I may do this, I might do this. And people pick up on the language. When I see someone saying potentially going to do that, might do that, I can see you're not so sure whether or not your research is going to make a difference, right? You're going to say that if I combine these two things, one that has a anti-cancer effect, the other one which is less cytotoxic, when I combine the two, I am going to make a drug that is active against cancer, which is non-cytotoxic. You're going to tell people that. It might be true, it might not be true, but that's what research is. But in order to let people give you money to do that, you're going to be confident in what you're going to do, right? So always be very, very positive. What results you aim to achieve? Find a lead compound. You see that I'm very positive here. I'm not saying I'm going to find a potential lead compound, or I'm going to find a compound that may be developed. I'm going to say find a lead compound that can, you see the words I'm using, that can be developed into a drug. And if I'm telling you that I'm going to do that, and you are looking in people that you want to do research on drugs, you're going to give this person money to do that because they said they can do that. And then after the money is finished, you can actually say that, okay, I wasn't successful, but I came close. Or I have results which can be improved on. This is what I'm going to do to improve on this and be successful. You can see your next round of funding comes for postdoc. Once you finish your postdoc and say, okay, I thought I'm going to reach here, but now I want to be an academic and I want money because I want to do my own research as a scientist, right? So you can always build on what you can actually do. Right, so the rationale and literature review is very, very important. And I think I told you why. You need to identify what people are doing. And also you need to identify gaps. Don't forget that you need to tell people what you're reading. You need to tell people who the players in the field are. Right? If people are making hybrid molecules and they're not citing what I'm doing here in UKZN with quinolines and benzimidazoles, and I'm reading that, but I say, we did that here, and they're not even looking at our work, and we are a player in the game. So don't forget about putting the referencing in there. And that's when you make a statement, this one's done before, tell them who did it. And it's nice to use, and people put numbers in the referencing section. I don't like numbers in a proposal because sometimes people don't have time to go to the list and look at, okay, number 5 is did this. Let me go and see what number 5 is. Number 6 is that. Let me go and look for number 6. People don't like to do that. And sometimes people don't even have space to put a reference list in your particular proposal itself. They append a list to the application. So your reference list can be appended to your application if need be as well, if you don't have space. But if you use the Harvard referencing system where you say Koorbanally et al., Mhlongo et al., Naidu et al., Smith et al., people can say, okay, Smith and his group have done that. Koorbanally and his group have done that, and people will know what you've done. So I like using the Harvard system of referencing. Don't over-reference as well. And students do this a lot. They secondary reference, and that's a whole nother lecture as well, where you read something and they put 4 different publications down there because those people might have read that 4 publications. And when you want to put a statement, you say, okay, I'm going to trust that they were correct. I'm going to put all these people in there. But I don't know who Smith is, right? Because that person read Smith. If you haven't read it, don't put it in. Right? Because then you don't know what mistake somebody else is carrying on. And you might be just secondary referencing, he told me. And if we can do an experiment, there's many experiments done around this. I tell Shakira something, he tells her something. As it goes around the room, by the time it gets to you right at the end, it's something totally different. That's because that's secondary referencing. You haven't come to me, and then you come to me and ask me what you said, and you can actually see how it's totally different from what is being said earlier on. So make sure you read it. Even if you just read the abstract to see what was the paper about, or you read the punchlines, or you scan through the paper and see what it is that you want to reference in there, put the name of the person who did the work, right? Because later on, you're going to do some science and you will look at citation indices as well. You want to say, okay, how many people have cited me? And you want people to cite you for what you actually did as a scientist. All right, so that's very, very important. Identify the gaps is also the important. I talked about that. What do you intend to do? I spoke about that as well. What are you going to do? And very, very importantly here, it's the methodology that you're going to use. All right, so don't feel shy or say, okay, maybe this is not needed. Put how you're going to do, what methodology you're going to use in your particular work. I'm not going to do it at a very low level. So I'm not going to tell them I'm going to take 5 milliliters of water, 10 teaspoons of sugar, 1 lemon, 1 orange, 1 apple. I'm not going to tell them all that, but you're going to tell them that I'm going to maybe bake a cake using fruit and sugar and whatever it is. I'm going to make a fruit cake. I'm going to use fruit in that particular cake. I'm going to you're going to use dried fruit, that type of thing. I'm using a very crude example, right? But you're going to tell them the methodology you want to use. What is the importance of telling them what methodology you're using? The people that are reviewing it sometimes might also be people in that field that say, okay, you're using the normal conventional things that everybody uses. I can see that the applicant is knowledgeable about the methodology in the field. We're not going to waste our money if we're going to give it to that person to do. Right? So it's very, very important to tell people how, and what better way of getting the methodology is by reading the literature. When you read the literature, you also get a very good idea of how people are doing things. The instruments that they're using. I'm going to test my samples in these particular assays that other people are doing. I'm going to use instruments that I can see other people are using. And you're going to put that in your application so people can see, okay, I know Neil knows what he's talking about. He knows what instruments to use. He knows what chemicals to use. He knows what methodology, and I'm likely to fund him. I spoke about this as well. What results do you hope to get? Right? If I make this, what do I think I'm getting? And I spoke a little bit about that. Tell people what you want to get. Right? So be positive. I'm going to do this expecting a particular result. It may not be what you expect, but if it's not what you expect, it's not the end of the world, because you can also go back now and see why didn't you get what you thought you're getting, why you're getting something else, right? But tell them what you're expecting first, because if you don't know what you're expecting, it's like, okay, let me add flour and sugar and milk and everything together and put it in the oven, and then I don't know whether I'm going to make a car or not, right? And when I open it, it's not a car, it's a cake, right? So tell people, this is what I'm expecting. I'm expecting to put milk and sugar and everything together. And if I put a little bit of orange in it, I'm expecting to bake this cake, which tastes a little bit like orange cake. And when you taste that cake and it's not tasting like orange, tasting more like vanilla, you go back and see. Let me look at what I put in the cake now and see why it's not tasting like orange. Design my experiments, I design my method such that now I want to manipulate it so that it does taste like an orange cake and not something different. Very, very important, what significance and impact your work has. And I spoke about this as well, right? Put that into your project outline. What is the significance? I want to find a cure for something. I want to make a new storage model for something. I want to make another distribution pattern for water or energy. I want to decrease the amount of sulfur in petrol, right? And what is the significance on that? You can see engines are not going to fail. Something's going to happen. Put the significance and impact of your work into that. And don't feel shy to go big, right? You can actually say if you're going to take out sulfur from petrol, you're not going to say in Durban it's going to make a difference to the lives of people in Durban, right? If you can take out sulfur from petrol, you're going to make an impact to global economies. You're going to say that I'm going to make an impact to global economies, because all over the world, regardless of what continent you're in or where you stay, you might not stay in Westville, right? You might be staying in Beijing and China and the US and Europe, but taking sulfur out of that petrol is going to be an impact for that particular field. So say that, global economies, a global scale. If I'm going to make a drug for diabetes, it's not going to help people in UKZN. It's going to help people all over the world. Obesity is not a problem here, it's a problem all over the world. So if I find, something that can alleviate obesity, it's going to make a global impact, right? So don't feel shy about doing that. At the end of the day, it's how are you going to make life better and improve on what we already have. And that's why you signed it, right? You may not know that sitting here. You may come here to university because you're out of school and you need something to do. So the natural progression from school is university. And then you come into a research degree because you finish your degree, you can't get a job, and now you're doing your research. So you're just continuing, but you don't know that all these steps along the line have been training you for one day, making the world a better place for your generation and generations to come, right? You see that what we're actually doing now, and you look at the cyclone that we had in Tonga. We never experienced tornadoes before in Durban. And look at the weather changes that we're having, the rains that we're getting, the floods that we're getting, right? That's affecting our temperatures now, it's affecting our weather patterns now, it's affecting our generation, but imagine in generations to come. So we don't clean up the environment and we don't do things to be greener, we are not going to put a better world out there for our children and our children's children, right? So you're going to have to make sure that it's your responsibility and nobody else's responsibility. In fact, I'm going to be retired in 10 years and I'm going to take a break. And then I want the people in this room here to pick up the baton and see how they're going to solve the world's problems in time to come, all right? So how are you going to make life better and improve on what we already have must come out in your application. In the PhD, if you are doing a PhD, it's the same type of things that I spoke about, all right? So in the master's application and the PhD application, the same type of things, but some type of different things that you can actually do in a PhD application that you might not find in a master's application. Sometimes in a PhD, you've got a longer time, right? So you can actually, in a PhD project, say what new things you're going to do and what you're going to try over a time span. So maybe over 3 years, you want to do this facet and then that facet and then another facet. So you want to make something, try it out in something, and then build on that, and then take that result and build on that result, right? So if I'm doing a master's, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make this, I'm going to solve this. That's master's. PhD, I'm going to make this and try it in this system. I'm going to take the best result from here and then improve on that in this particular system. I'm going to take the best model from here and work on an ultimate product at the end of 3 years. Right, and I can actually see, okay, I can give this person money for 3 years now to actually do that particular work, right? So that's going to come out here. So the severity of the problem might be different. Statistics always help, right? So wherever you can, I always in my grants like to take WHO statistics to show people how bad antibacterial resistance actually is, to show people how many people died of COVID in that COVID era. So if I'm going to do pandemic, research now and try to keep drugs lined up, should something happen, we can just try these array of drugs. I don't have to go into the lab and make them again. I just have these drugs to try, right? I can show them statistics. All these people died. This is what we need to do, right? I'm going to tell them, if you want to save the next pandemic, we don't want 4 or 5 million people to die. In fact, it was much more than that. But you don't want people to die. You want to save all those lives, right? So put some statistics in. It will actually help. Right, and very, very important, put in references to support your claims. So if you're claiming something, always put in references. So if you're going to say that I'm going to make something new, put in references where they've tried and where they've actually made something that was a precursor to what you've made. As I said, you don't get up one morning and say, okay, I want to make a cell phone, right? People along the years, you might be too young here, but in the olden days, we had telephones that had lines in it, which was placed. And we had to dial up on that with the lines, right? And before people even thought about cell phones, people thought about satellites. And people worked on satellites. And then once they built the satellite, then they worked on applications for the satellite. And that's how they came up with the cell phone and streaming and YouTube and everything that you just at the click of a button now. It's because someone has actually done that before, right? So people have done all that. What are you going to do now to make life easier? Right? Maybe transport. I want to press a button here, take me back to my car and be transported. I don't want to walk. right? You might think it's far-fetched, but if you told me that I would have a telephone, a TV, and computer in my pocket when I was growing up, I'd have said crazy. I would have said crazy. So when I'm saying teleporting myself to my car, you're thinking crazy. 20 years from now, someone's going to be giving a lecture here, going to Tokyo and coming back in 10 seconds and telling you that, I met my uncle in Tokyo and now I'm giving a lecture here at UKZN, right? I'm not going to go through this in general because I spoke about all of these before, but generally for the PhD, you're going to do the same thing that you would done for a PhD, and all the things I covered are in this slide as well. I'll make these slides available as well. I'll tell my secretary to send it out to all the people in the college and give you these slides so it's at your disposal as well. Right, I've told you all about this, and be very, very forthright here. Make an impact, right? And if I can just go a little bit more about an impact, right? Is your research going to make a difference to the world? And if your research is going to make a difference to the world, don't keep it back. Tell the funder, this is how it's going to impact the world, right? Put that in there. Are you going to make people's lives easier or better? Right? You don't want to do research to make people's lives more difficult. You want to make people's lives easier, right? How is it going to make people's lives better? How is it going to make people's lives easier? Can I eat all the chocolate cake I want? Not worrying about diabetes, right? Can you actually make something so that I can drink something before I eat all that chocolate cake, right? Or not, right? So I'm going to make them. And if you're going to do that, the impact is by how much, right? So don't feel shy about telling people by how much making an impact. So I put a few things here, just a few silly examples that I always say. I made a phone that people could carry around with them as it operates off a beacon and not through wires. How convenient, right? So people thought about this maybe 20 years ago, making a phone that people could carry, right? That operates off a beacon and not off wires. So you find if you went somewhere, if there was no telephone lines, they didn't have a phone in that area, but now people have made the cell phone. So how convenient have our lives become with the cell phone, right? I don't have to tell my wife now, meet me at 3 o'clock outside Edgar's at the pavilion. When I was young, people said at 2 o'clock, we're all meeting at this point here because we're going home, right? Now we say, okay, let's see how it goes. I'll give you a call. Everybody's got a phone to do that. So how convenient have we made our lives? Another silly example, I made 3 new antibiotics against a wide spectrum of pathogenic bacteria. These can be used when currently used drugs are no longer effective against pathogenic bacterial species due to mutations. This will save millions of lives. I put this in here because this is talking about bacteria. Now, way back in the day, people got sick. And if you got sick and you had a bacterial infection, after a couple of weeks, you died. I imagine having a terrible flu, having a cough that persists, and not being able to go to the doctor. People today say, oh, you got a bad cough, I'm going to see a doctor tomorrow. What does a doctor do? They give you drugs, you take those drugs, 2 weeks later, it kills the bacteria, and you cure, right? But 100 years ago, people were dying of a plague, they had fever, and then they died because there was nothing they could use to actually bring their fever down. So you see how it's actually made our lives better, right? And this one I put in because the first time I gave this talk was after COVID, right? I found a new antiviral drug active against SARS-CoV-2, and COVID can now be treated with this drug. This has reduced the mortality rates by 99%. So way back in 2021, when I gave this talk, there wasn't a drug found. Now we have molnupiravir. Molnupiravir was actually discovered after this, and that's the antiviral that you can take if you have COVID now that will treat the virus. If only we had that drug during the pandemic, we wouldn't have been locked up for 1.5 or 2 years. So can you see how world gets better? So the next time we have COVID, it's not going to be a big deal now. We know how to treat it. We can get vaccinated. We can take drugs against it. We know how to treat it. It's made the world better, and it's made our lives easier. Right, and that's my last slide. Thank you for your attention. I hope I have made an impact on you today so that you can actually go ahead and work on your proposals. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have. see there's also some questions
Yeah,
online.
there's one thing. Can I just read out the question because it might apply to you guys as well? So I hope the audio can work. So there's a question from Asanda. For a PhD project, is it still considered original when you do something that has been done in a different ecosystem to a different ecosystem where it has never been done?
Right. The question of novelty is a very interesting one, and it's particularly interesting for people who want to engage in PhD studies. When we tell a PhD student, you have to do something novel. Now they say, okay, and they always start thinking of new ideas, right? Let me create something totally horrendous and totally new. And as I said, you don't need to make something totally new, you're going to build on something. So Asanda, if you're going to use some parameters and put it in a new ecosystem, I'm saying there's some form of novelty in that. So you see how you don't need to make something totally new. If you want to take a system and then try it in another system, that is novelty itself, right? Trying it in a different system. But be very, very careful as well, right? Because there's degrees of novelty. And when people are giving you money, they are going to give you money to do research for the degree of novelty that you have, right? They're not just going to give you money for doing something new. They're going to be giving you money for how new it is. So if you can put a system that you tweak in several ways, see how it fares in that ecosystem and see how it fares in other ecosystems, I'm more likely to give you money for that than just give you money for taking that system and putting it in a new ecosystem. So although I would say, yes, there's a degree of novelty there, I'm going to say, but what you're doing is not a PhD project. That's more like a master's project, right? Taking something that's known and just trying it in a new ecosystem. I would say that is a master's. A PhD would be to take that ecosystem, make some changes in that model, see what the effect the changes has, and try that in different ecosystems. As I said, the first phase can be making the changes in your PhD. I want to build on that by making another round of changes. And my last part can be putting it in different ecosystems. And that will be a PhD project. And that would be much better to get funding than just taking something and putting it in a new ecosystem. Asanda, I hope I answered your question.
There's another question. This is from Emmanuel. I am a foreign student doing my master's research in agriculture science, crop science. I just finished my first semester. Am I eligible to apply for the funding against next year?
Okay. So she just finished
Just finished the first semester.
So you can apply for funding at any point. So if you don't have funding, you can apply for funding at any point during your degree, especially for PhD. So if I didn't get funding, if I applied when I was in my master's, I didn't get funding, I'm going to try again in my first year. And it's very, very important for PhD students to always try for funding. You'll notice scientists like Dr. Sheikh and myself, we're always looking for avenues of funding. I don't say, okay, I've got this money now, I'm satisfied with this money, I'm not going to try and look at other ways of getting funding. We're always looking at avenues of getting funding. So if you don't have a bursary and you're sitting here and you're getting a small amount, I would say keep on trying until you don't have enough time to try again. So if I'm my last year of my PhD and I got 6 months to complete, it's not going to make any sense for someone to fund me for 6 months. But if my first year, I'm going into second year, I'm going to say I still need money for another 2 years. If in my second year, I'm going to say I need money for this year and my final year. And even if in my final year, I'm going to try and say I need money for my last year. Right? So there's always, you can always, and things will change. From the first year, you might have not published. Maybe you published work after your first year. You can use that as a now advantage to your application to say, look at what I've actually done. I've got 2 years left, fund me to continue. Right? After 2 years, can you see what I've done here? I've got this last phase to do. Can you fund me for this last phase? Right? So I would always look for funding and always apply. You'll always be eligible until such time that you're not.
I think in the case of you're applying and you're sitting a third year of the PhD, for example, then the master's result will be used in that scoring system. Because for the first year PhD, they would use your honors,
Yeah, yeah.
but just remember that as well.
Mm.
For the masters will count in that.
Yeah, things will change. So when you're in your master's year applying for a PhD, they'll use your honors marks. But if you first your PhD, you would have got your master's by then, and they would have used your master. So if you did badly in your honors, and the deadline has passed, and you put in the application, and you're now in your first year of PhD, but you did very well in your master's, I would say apply again with your master's result. The chances are much better. Okay, fine.
Hannah has said that you answered the question. There's another one from the group here. Do you have any links for travel grants to attend international conferences?
We had a lot of funding in the College for International Conferences, but we've actually run out of funding now. We've funded at least about 50 students, 50 PhD students and master's students for conferences. So we've actually done very well. So there's a lot of people who have never ever have gone to an international or national conference have actually gone to, and we've actually run out of funding now. So I'm just about next week, early next week, I'll send out an email to say the conference funding has been depleted. But we're looking at this space, and I'm looking at ways now in my new position of creating more funds to help students attend conferences. So hopefully next year or so, it'll be much wider funding. Good. So I think you all have all that you need now. I think the point that I was trying to drive home today, it's not an easy process. It's not a simple process, and start now. So if you start now, do your homework, think about what you want to do. Oh, sorry, there's two things that I wanted to talk about, and I probably missed it in this talk here. The one is checking. And once you complete everything, it's nice for you to print out, and you can print it out on PDF these days. So you don't need to, sometimes that application is 30 pages or 17 pages or 20 pages. You don't want to print the whole 20 pages out. You can print it out to PDF, right? And once you print it out, I say read it from the start to the end. Pick up areas where you pick up your typos, you pick up formatting changes, you pick up full stops that you left out, commas that you left out, put it in there to make your application as good as it can be. Because there's nothing worse than reading an application and there's typos in there, the grammar is bad, this is bad. It detracts away from what you want to actually do. People are looking at the grammar and the spelling rather than the application itself, right? So checking is important. And I said, get an opinion. So once you finish the whole thing, make sure you finish everything within a week from submission. So you can take that application a week from submission, give it to your friend, give it to someone in the lab senior, give it to your supervisor, and give it maybe to another lecturer who you know well and who's always been a mentor to you. And say, this is my application. If you have time within the next few days, read it. You see, I'm not saying give it to one person, because in all likelihood, and people are so busy today, right? Sandika can be, busy with other things. And I only gave it to her, and I come 4 days later and she says, oh, I didn't have time to read it. So I'm saying give it to 4 or 5 people. If you get 2 or 3 people, or even one person out of that 4 people, if you get feedback from there, that feedback will be useful for you in order to fine-tune your application, change a few things here, change a few things there, fine-tune this, and then submit your application. And you can see then your application will be the best that it can actually be, right? So don't just complete it. And I'm so glad I completed it. I hit send and it's gone, right? So complete it, print it out, you read it, give it to other people to read, get feedback, and then it'll be the best it can be. So good luck with your applications, and I look forward to seeing them in the college.
Thank you very much, everyone. Zoom students, we are ending the session. Thank you very much for your involvement, and I will email the recording. Thank you.